Welcome to Between Two Chairs, Demystifying Commercial Real Estate, the podcast that brings you the latest insights and trends on the South Florida commercial real estate market, with your hosts, Fernando Arencibia Jr. and Jennifer Woolman. In each episode, we dive into the world of commercial real estate and break down complex concepts to make them accessible for everyone. Whether you're a real estate professional, a curious investor, or just interested in the South Florida market in general, Between Two Chairs is the podcast for you. So pull up a chair and join us.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Between Two Chairs. My name is Fernando Arencibia. I am very happy to be here with my amazing co-host, Jennifer Woolman. And today we have decided to delve into the world of office.
As an asset class, right? We did an episode where we briefly covered all of the asset classes in commercial real estate. And now today we're going to do a deeper dive in office, which is kind of ironic, I think, because everybody's saying, oh, office is dead. You know, all bad things are happening to office buildings in San Francisco are at an all-time high vacancy rate, but we're not seeing that so much in Miami.
No, not at all. You know, we see that certain buildings are thriving and that there is certainly, a healthy demand for office space in Miami. And there's even the sentiment of the way that our market feels about office is very different than many other markets around the country that are seeing a huge decline in demand, right? And it's putting a lot of pressure on the value of those assets. In Miami, not only do we see demand, but we're seeing growth in as far as new construction of office. That says, I think, a lot as to where the confidence is of what not only office is today, but what office will be in the not so distant future in our market.
Correct. And so most of the stuff being built today, well, everything being built today is Class A office. So why don't we get into the basics of office as a group for the beginning investor or real estate agent who wants to get into this asset class, because it's a fun asset class to be in and to do tenant and landlord rep in. So there's three types of office space, right? Class A, Class B, and Class C. And the Class A office buildings are usually the investment grade, right? They're the ones that have the lowest risk. They're the most expensive. They're highly amenitized. Most of them have large spaces that are taken over that are being leased by quality national and international, usually corporate tenant. Very desirable, usually have some really cool features, like some of the ones that we see in Miami. One of my favorite office buildings is the Arch building. Love that architectural design. So that type of building is A. So you want to go a little bit over Class B?
Well, they're older, right? They don't have the hot new amenities, but they're still very well kept and very well run. They're usually located in a good location, right? So it does provide a lot of value, those Class B buildings, but they just don't have the shiny new amenities that you would normally find in Class A office.
Right.
What I do find interesting is that usually an owner of a Class B building is looking for ways, if they're managed well, looking for ways to add upon those amenities, right, and reconfigure the space, right, and go through a renovation so that they can, achieve more of a Class A experience, right? So you do have that ability that you have there, and then Class C.
Right. And Class B, I wanted to go back to that for a little bit before we go to Class C, because what we're seeing right now in Miami is because Miami's Class A office is so hot and the prices have gone up so much in terms of a price per square foot that we are starting to see flight to Class B from some of the tenants that just either want to be closer to home or just can't afford the rents that the Class A offices in Brickell have. Absolutely. And then Class C are significantly definitely older buildings. They don't have any historical significance. They're just, kind of functionally obsolete, below market rents to attract some kind of tenants. And then they usually don't have as good a management program in place and everything else, right? Because those owners are just kind of breaking even. And from a buying standpoint, that one's the highest risk, right? So, and I think in a lot of cases, those are actually the ones that are good for either tear down or to try to gut and reposition. And it was interesting because I was listening to Michael Bull's podcast. Michael Bull of Bull Realty has a great podcast called America's Commercial Real Estate Show. And he interviewed somebody this week from Greenleaf Capital Partners, and he was talking about how they actually like to invest in DNF properties, which we don't really have a DNF class, but they were basically saying that right now, even though most people are staying away from office due to all of the fear and negative stories surrounding vacancy rates and demand and everything else that was exacerbated by the pandemic. Most of these properties, what I love about what he was saying is one that they tend to invest in single-story office buildings because those are the ones they know best. That's what they know best. Very low, DNF class, as he was saying, so kind of like the edge of scary. Yeah. And then they reposition them. So I loved that because that goes kind of along Warren Buffett's investment theory of, be fearful when everybody is greedy and be greedy when everybody's fearful. Yeah. And I feel like right now everybody is moving away from office. The big institutional investors are actually getting rid of office. Yeah. And in places like San Francisco, obviously those offices, even though so many of them are vacant, just the quality of the offices are definitely more institutional. I think in a lot of markets in the United States, you'd be able to find some pretty good investment opportunities in office.
And we know statistically that investors are looking for those opportunities. And every year, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce brings out a report on the future of office or, the current standing of office. And I was reading that 71% of builders and 68% of architects are being asked to find ways to reconfigure office space, especially that Class C, where you can, achieve a lower basis, entry point into the investment and then reconfigure it. And I think that is where the value is there. Now, if you are buying a Class C office, right, it's the building and it is the way that the building is configured inside. Let's talk about the building first. What are things that are a must for you that give value to that asset, even though it's Class C?
Parking.
Right. Yeah.
I have to say parking based on our experience with two office buildings that we've been trying to lease that are that just don't have enough parking. So I would say parking for any class is still number one. It doesn't matter Correct. The building. If you're going into office, you need to have great parking. And if you're going into medical office, you need to have exceptional parking. Right. So the first thing that I would look for is definitely parking. I would also look at maintenance, especially here in Florida, because being able to reconfigure or repurpose a Class C building that already has, to your point, issues, especially inside with the floor plan, if in addition to that, it hasn't been maintained and you have structural issues, then you're really looking more at land value, tear down, rebuild, and that's not something that I personally get into, but
I think that's definitely a big part of it is the parking location, of course, being very important. I find interesting, I went to show an office building right off of Coral Way and about 19th Avenue, somewhere around there. It was built in the 1990s, probably 97. Had some interesting architectural design, but it was a medical use. I could not figure out what was the parking ratio because I kept looking around it doesn't have a garage and I don't see a lot of parking. And they basically bought the lot behind it, right? And they're using it for parking. But I'm counting the parking spaces, and I'm like, based on the square footage of the building, that this does not, make any sense. And at the time, the listing agent had told me that there was, I think, north of 3.5 parking spaces per square foot, which is, per 100 square feet. So, you have your requirement, per the county, right, that will require when you're going to get a certificate of use. And for the city of Miami, this is in the city of Miami. So, What I found interesting was that, he was claiming that the ratio was above the ask or close to it, but he was basically saying we could fit 100 and something cars there, but he could fit it in because of the because they had 3 valet parkers that were just scrunching the cars, right? And so I found that dynamic to be of course crazy, but that becomes a nightmare. We might only go there every once in a while because we have, an appointment there, but imagine working there day.
And I wonder how in that case, so first of all, clarifying it's
1,000
per thousand, right.
Coffee, yeah.
And then, but when you
finish my coffee. Yeah.
I know it's an early podcast recording. But to your point, so, and in medical, even if it might be in that area, let's say it was 3 per thousand, in medical, usually the ideal is like 4.5 per thousand.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering if they were so under, how did they get the certificate of use, right?
Right.
And then the second thing is, were they doing telehealth? Because when you were there, I don't know what time you were there, but are they doing a lot of telehealth, or what exactly type of medical was it? Because there's certain medical that doesn't have the patient flow or the patient concentration at a given time that other medical does. So that's curious.
Imagine this 9-story building, this 7-story building, and that it has general practitioner, it had a plastic surgeon, it had a physical therapy. Oh. So imagine all of that crunch up in a place where you have 3 valet parkers that are moving, and everything is double parked. Every single car is double parked. Wow. And I agree with you. The first thing I think about is, how did they find, before they bought the lot behind after the fact.
Right.
So how did they have enough parking to be able to build what they built medical, there?
Yeah. And the other thing that's interesting is that, so with medical space and parking and valet, so according to code, the valet parking is really only allowed for what you need above, but you have to meet the minimal number of spaces per 1,000 square feet. So again, it would be really curious to see if your tenant were to pursue that space, or your investor, to figure out how they got those certificate of uses, or what the county and city are looking at now that allowed them to change that parking ratio.
Exactly. Now, what I find interesting in as you move into Class B and Class C is, I once heard the developer of 1450 Brickell speak. His name escapes me for some reason, but he was wonderful. And it was a presentation at FIU, and he mentioned how long they worked to find the right glass for the impact glass of that building, because he wanted to create a building that was sustainable and that was functioning through a hurricane. When they were designing the building, there was a storm that came by, and as he was driving by Brickell, there was glass all over the floor. He spends months trying to figure out what is the right consistency that he's looking for the glass on it. Then he creates basically a pool of generators that are in the roof that have a combination of solar. He creates a way for him to collect the rainwater. And one of the things that he spoke was about the experience of walking into the building, that a lot of the architectural designs that he was getting was going to maximize the square footage that he would be able to do, but he wanted a really grand entrance. He wanted a lobby that would be welcoming. He wanted people to feel like, even though you're inside, there's a lot of light, and it feels like there's almost like if there's fresh air, like you're not, you don't feel, tight. And I think that all of those decisions are not necessarily about the bottom line per square foot. I gotta fit everything into, I gotta maximize all the stuff. But it's more about what that experience is for someone that is going to be there if you work in an office, for 20 years,
Right.
You're going to be there 5 days a week, 8 hours a day. So that thinking, I think, is it's very obvious when you walk into a building, when that thought process has gone in and when none of that thought came into the design of the building.
Right. And I think it's interesting because, to your point, just when you were describing that building, I was thinking, oh, I bet people really enjoy going to work there. Like, they're proud of where they work. It's not like, oh, I'm going to work and they're going into a dark building with no windows and everything else. So I think that thoughtfulness and also the sustainability that you're putting in from the major tenant, right? So there's two different aspects, right? There's the main tenant who's the employer of the worker that I just described. But for the main tenant, it's like, okay, so if there is a storm and, the electricity goes out, how long before I can be up and running and functional? And in his building, obviously, from day one, right? Because we have generators to kick in and make up for all that. So I'm sure he's getting top dollar. He's probably one of the buildings getting top dollar.
Oh no, without a doubt. And that's one of the markets. Brickell is one of the markets that has not only sustained but exceeded. I mean, I think their average is about $95 a square foot in some parts of Brickell, and it's achievable based on location and really based on what they have built. Everybody's looking for flexibility, hybrid, good airflow, good lighting. And some of those buildings already were thinking about that way before there was even the thought of a pandemic or a sense of the well-being, right, and the experience for the end user.
Right, and I think 95 isn't an average, but I know that buildings are getting above 95, like the one that you described. Yeah. Have you read Blanca's second quarter office report?
No, but I love Blanca. They're awesome.
Well, you would love this one even more because they did this super creative thing using F1 as the version of what's happening in Miami's market, past and current. So you would love it. I highly recommend you read it just for the F1 comparison. You would love it. But they stated that the average overall office for Class A is about $60 a square foot in Miami.
I've heard other people say 57, 95, something like that.
Right.
So
it depends on the report.
I think the numbers are very good.
And everything else.
But them, JLL, and Avison Young, they're within $2-3 of each.
Correct.
So that tells you that the data is
right. And then we have so many submarkets in Miami, right? We have the Brickell downtown market. Then we have Coral Gables, which is an extremely strong market. We have Coconut Grove, which doesn't have a ton of office space, but it's always in very high demand. So
we've invited someone from Blanca Commercial, Juan Ruiz, who I love and adore. He's a great broker, and it's just wonderful to work with them. And we put a deal together in Blue Lagoon. Blue Lagoon is an area that has the most Fortune 500 companies in South Florida have their offices there. And one of the things that I find interesting about, they represent about 10 buildings there that is owned by this partnership between a REIT and an insurance company. And what I found interesting is the amount of money and thought that goes into making improvements to their building, right? They're Class A, but making improvements to the buildings every year. So they had just reconfigured the lobbies. They have reconfigured every single floor, every entryway, and then the following year they earmark a ton of money. So the thing about that Class A experience is that you never really stop investing, right? And if you run it right, that has to be part of your budget when you are managing, hundreds of thousands of square feet of office space.
Let me ask you, when did you do that lease?
So that lease was signed, right at the end of last year.
Okay, so I'm curious because typically office leases go like 7 to 10 years or 5 to 10 years, and lately I've been seeing 3 to 5 year requests.
Right.
How long was this lease for?
This was a 5-year lease with 2 5-year options. You're right. And I honestly would love to have a CPA come in here to have a conversation about something that I have found interesting, and I don't know if there is a connection. There was a shift about a couple of years ago where the IRS code and the law changed on how leases are treated in your balance sheet and how they're treated in your P&Ls. And I have a sense that whereby people would want to do a 10-year lease, that perhaps because of accounting purposes, there is more of a value to create 5-year leases with the options to renew and then just deal with the renewal. I'm speculating, but I think that might be, because ever since that change has been made, I've noticed more and more the desire to have those 5 years. Now, this company that I represented on this, I had just put them on a 10,000 square feet office space in Doral before they went into, before we hit the pandemic. And during the pandemic, of course, they were seeing themselves, man, nobody's coming to the office. Then when they started coming back, not everybody wanted to come back to the office. It was hybrid, all that other stuff. This is a company that believes in its core the importance of culture. They are in a very technical field. A lot of their concern was the amenities of the area, the amenities of the building, and the amenities of the office space that they were going to build out for their employees. Making sure they had a place to rest, making sure they had a place to play, right, and exercise, and making sure that they had a lot of the ambience surrounding it that was going to be, very, very important to them. So when they call me and they say, now we're looking for more space, because they're growing and their employees are seeing the value of coming back into the office, I think says a lot about the culture that they built, And I think that when not everybody looks, I've worked with other clients that don't look at office like that. They're just looking at what's the price per square foot, what is it going to cost me. But I'm seeing a huge shift. Even before the pandemic, I started to see it. We all say that what the pandemic did was, accelerate trends that were already there. I think that mindset serves them well. And in fact, they're at a point where now they're doing the build out. But once they finish the build out, they're like, I think we're going to be right at capacity pretty much by the time they move in, which is crazy, because I think people are clamoring, for that experience.
To go back to the office. Yeah. So it's interesting you said about, because whether or not it was because of the way that the IRS looks at leases, or it's the fact that the pandemic sped up the work from home.
Right.
I think that that's another reason why maybe people are looking at the shorter leases to see kind of where this is all going to level out. Right?
Correct.
During the pandemic, it was like nobody was in the office. Then it became like, okay, a couple of days a week in the office. I spoke to my son in London, and he was saying that both he and his fiance's companies are saying, they had said 1 to 2 days a week.
Right.
Now it's 3 to 4 days a week back in office. And I think, to your point, it's that they're realizing that you can accomplish a lot on Zoom and online, but nothing takes place of being in person and having that creative energy flowing in an office.
Absolutely.
So you mentioned, is their office space that you did it just now, was that more of a traditional office, or was it more of a creative type open?
Interestingly enough, it had the perfect combination of independent offices and a huge bullpen.
Okay.
This was the former headquarters for Pepsi-Cola here in Miami. And so they had a huge bullpen area, and then they had basically three or four conference rooms, because they had a testing area. They had the marketing had their own conference room, so they had it kind of divided in that way. It's beautiful because you're overlooking the lagoon and you're overlooking the airport, and
right.
So this is an engineering company that does that deals with civic projects, water, transportation. So it's just perfect. You're looking at the airport,
right?
Right, infrastructure. You're looking at water, and you're looking at the Palmetto Expressway, right in front of you, and the big lake. So it's just like a perfect thing. But the open area is important to them.
Right. So it's a little bit not like our office in Doral, where you have the smaller conference rooms, a bigger conference room, a big open area for the collaboration. And I think that that's a trend where it's almost like a hybrid, right? It's not a traditional office, but it's not 100% creative.
Yeah.
And that is the trend that I'm seeing. And I'm seeing, the glass walls for transparency, right? Transparency in everything we do is kind of a big word, whether it's work or paperwork or deals or whatever. So
I've also seen amazing things. I saw an office that had an entire playroom with musical instruments. Then they had a sound, almost like a sound deprivation room. They had 2 beautiful massaging chairs, and it was extremely dark, and you would go in there and you would bring your sleeping night covers, and you can be there for 15, 20 minutes, 30 minutes. You could take a nap. You could just kind of unwind.
Was that the Gensler building at 545 Wynn? They have something similar.
Yeah, no, this was inside of a built-out office that was in Coral Gables.
Okay.
But it was really right by the colonnade. I think it was in the colonnade in that office sector that's there. The first thing you walk in, you saw all the musical instruments, and everybody was working, and everybody seemed to be very happy. And it was, lots of vertical space and lots of light,
Right.
And so it's a vibe, and they really have created that vibe. Now, one of the things that is really interesting is we all have gotten used to Zoom, right?
Yes.
And, but it's ironic that Zoom has basically told its employees, hey, it's time to go back to the office, right? Yeah. And Facebook, Meta, has told its employees, it's time to come back to the office. There is something that you lose by not having a place to connect, and I personally would hate to have, in my mind, envision that I would always have to work from home.
Right.
There's something about being here. There's something about.
I didn't last very long at home.
You didn't last very long at home?
I was back at the office so fast as soon as we could get
Was it you that didn't last, or was it your companions that were kicking you out?
Was it entire family?
Was it Carlos? Carlos is like, listen,
Carlos never had time off. Carlos, he worked at Port Everglades, so he worked the entire time. No, for me, it's more. I don't know.
So you were really jealous of Carlos because he would get to go every day.
I was. No, I think what it is that, I bookend my days, right? So in the morning, I do certain things to get me ready for the workday. And then when I'm in the office, it's just, I have a different brain. Yeah. It's more the do. At home, it's more the thinking, the creative, the planning. And then when I get to the office, it's the do, it's the bouncing ideas off. It's like when you get texts from me saying, hey, I went on a run, or hey, I thought of this. It's different telling you that via text or telephone versus when we're in person and we're chatting and we're fleshing out the idea. And I think most people are, most employers are realizing that.
Well, let me ask you, because I have a question specific to Class A, B, and C, and how the dynamics change in putting together a lease and putting together a deal. But before I do that, I want to tell you, there's nothing like competition to get people back into work. I got a great friend of mine. They're in this huge office in Coconut Grove, and they have multiple divisions within this company. It's an accounting firm. And, he was saying that there were people that were only showing up to work once a week. But they had their office, they had their desk, they had, basically planted their flag like, this is mine. But his division was growing, and everybody was in the office every day from his division. Mm-hmm. So eventually they just started a little bit like marauders. They were like, you know what? If you're not here and I need your desk, I'm taking over the desk.
Right.
Right. And then people started coming back, and it's like, I don't have a desk. I was like, hey, so now they made a rule. If you want a desk, you need to be here at least 3 times a week. So it wasn't the rule like, no, you have to come back. It's like, hey, if you want to rest, we're claiming the space.
Well, and that's interesting because now this word has come up called hoteling, where that's what it is, right? Where if the person doesn't come in every day, they kind of use it like hotel rooms, where like, okay, this office is used by so-and-so Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Tuesday, Thursday it's so-and-so, or just the open desk space.
And by the way, this office is like, I mean, it's like you say, it's like being in a hotel. They have, there's food everywhere, there's snacks everywhere, there's anything you want to drink, there's, you know, the spaces are beautiful, everything, there's tech all over the place, you know, it's like incredibly inviting place to come to work. They have assigned parking, you know, they have 2 floors of assigned parking. They're, you know, they're taken care of. And of course, you're in Coconut Grove.
Right.
There's great food.
You park your car if you drive into work and then walk everywhere else.
They can't entice people to come back to work.
Nobody can.
No, but they're doing it. But I do want to ask you about this. So normally when you put a deal together, just for people to understand this, like for example, this big space, you know, it needed to be built out. So normally, especially when you're Class A, usually you're dealing with an institutional owner, you're dealing with somebody savvy. In their management of this asset, when they're leasing it out, they're already accounting for TI, tenant improvement credits, for them to build out the space. Most of the time, what they will offer to the tenant is they'll offer a price per square foot, right, that they're willing to give them in order to build out, and that basically creates a budget for what they want to build out. But they would also offer to do the work themselves, right, because they already have all of the right people to be able to do it. So they will engage their architect, they will engage their contractors, because they have a vested interest in trying to finish out the space and the build out as quickly as possible.
Right, and if they build it out, they usually charge a management fee.
They do. They charge a management fee, but they usually can get below that budget, right? When you're dealing with Class B, Class C, you know, that's where it becomes, especially Class C, it becomes a different scenario, right? Where, you know, sometimes it's hard to achieve a tenant improvement credit because some of the spaces are just being kind of rented as is, for lack of a better term, and then you might get some rent abatement, basically get some months free rent, you know, out of it. Anything else that you can think of that differentiates the experience when you're dealing with leasing office space from Class C to Class A, for example?
I'd never really thought of it, but yeah, definitely more TI. I'm thinking of the Wells Fargo building lease that I did. Definitely more TI, definitely a lot more free rent. Although it's not really free rent. People think they're getting free rent, but it's just that they tack it onto the back actually when the rent is more expensive. So a lot of times the landlord does that. A lot of times if I'm trying to decrease the overall rent for the tenant, I'll say, okay, we want the free rent without it tacked onto the back, and then that'll change something. That'll change the amount of TI or whatever. But so yeah, that's because
to your point, if you're going to do a 5-year lease, a 60-month lease, and they're going to give you 4 months of free rent, they usually would say it's a 64-month lease,
right?
You know, with 4 months of free rent, because they're part of that is also because when a landlord is calculating the TI, they want to amortize that expense over 60 months. So they might say, well, you know, I'm really not going to start making money until after the 12th month, for example, right? And then the remaining, you know, 48 months are going to be that's where I really have revenue that is coming in that, you know.
Right. And they almost all of them, especially the Class A's, have clawbacks for if you break a lease ahead of time, or if you have a 10-year lease with an out at year 3 or 7 or whatever, they prorate all of the costs that they incurred, and if you break the lease, then you're still responsible for that dollar amount.
The other thing that happens that I think it's interesting for people to know is that the landlord is always going to want to evaluate the financial strength of the person that is leasing. I know you had an experience where you had a client that didn't want to share their financials. It's not as easy as saying, look, I'll give you the down payment, you know, I have the down payment, I have this. When you're doing for small office spaces, they're usually marketed like that. It's $1,500 a month where you're looking for 2 months rent, you know, security deposit, etc. You know, when you're dealing with the bigger spaces and in the bigger, you know, in the bigger arenas, usually a landlord wants to know what is the financial status of this company. Is this company able to really sustain the payments?
Right.
You know, because to the point that I just made about TI, if you're going to invest that amount of money in building out the space to their specifications, you want to make sure that they're going to be solid enough to likely, you know,
Right. And in a Class C building, since you're not getting TI, you usually don't have those issues. It's like first, last security. It's almost like a residential lease. And you can do much shorter terms because they don't have to amortize anything across.
But you had an experience where you had a client that was unwilling to, almost felt insulted by
that. Was for retail space. Yeah, that was for retail space. And, I had asked for the business plan and for the financials. And she's like, well, I have them, but, I never saw them. I didn't. And after we kept presenting the offers, she's like, I'll share them when we find a space, and she'd share them with the landlord, and the landlord would be like, no. Yeah. And then I'm like, well, let me see them to see if there's and she wouldn't show them. So I'm like, I can't help you because we had already 3 no's and, everything else. And she's like, well, this isn't how they do it where I'm from, which was, in California. In California, when she had taken her lease, it was different. It was like the owner owned it and liked the concept and let them in and did all the build out. I'm like, it doesn't work that way here because most of the properties that you're looking at are owned by an investment group, and they have to answer to not only to their investors but to the bank. And the bank controls what a lot of people don't realize is, especially in the Class A and B properties that have that have financing on it, the bank controls a lot of what the landlord can and can't do. So I also wanted to touch back on what you had said about C buildings and kind of the different asset classes of buildings, because you also have asset classes of locations, right? So you can't really have an A-class building in a C location, right? But you could have a C-class building in an A location. Like there's some amazing properties in Brickell that are C-class buildings, and Brickell is an A-class location. I think that's why Ken Griffin paid a fortune for a much older building that the owner, long-term hold, they were going to develop it, but he just saw the value, Ken saw the value in that location. And so I think that that's also something very interesting, because if you do find a C building in either an A or a B location, especially if you can figure out the corridors of expansion, right? So if you look at an area that's currently a Class A location and you can figure out which way the population's going to move, that's a little bit where the risk is, because if you buy on the edge of scary and they go in the other direction, then you've made a bad investment. But if you buy on the edge of scary and all of a sudden the A and the urban area catches up to you, now you've made a really good investment. So so I think that that's important too. It's not only the class of the building, it's the class of the location.
No, absolutely. And that's where the opportunity is, right?
Correct.
It's the equivalent of what people say: if you buy the ugliest house in the prettiest, right, in the best neighborhood, right? So that's you're usually going to do well. I remember when Andrew Frey was building Tesela, which was this, multifamily building without any parking. His tagline for the marketing was that Little Havana is the amenity. There's no amenities here, but this is the amenity is the neighborhood, and I think that is that is very, very valid.
And to your point, Brickell, before, when I moved here 30 something years ago, Brickell died at 5:00.
No doubt.
And during the weekends, ghost town, right? Yeah. Even though there were some condos in the area, for the most part, nothing was happening. Well, now it's a 24-hour city, right? Wow. Brickell has, with Brickell City Center, which was built by Swire, and Swire is the most patient, I think, developer that I've ever encountered, between what they did with Brickell Key and what they've done with Brickell City Center. They're very thoughtful in everything that they do, but they turned that area into an amenity. So Brickell itself now has not only a super vibrant office market that is hustling all the time, it also has a huge residential base that actually, I think what happened is during the Great Recession, they had built all of those buildings kind of speculatively and had all that crazy money going in there. And then everything went on sale and became a place where rents were so cheap on Brickell, but they had already started amenitizing the area. And now it's a hot place, and there's always some place to eat and everything else. So, and that in Coconut Grove, right? So now they're building more office space in Coconut Grove because there's so much demand for office to be there, because people love the Grove to live, and now they want to work there. They don't want to get in crazy Miami traffic. So are you ready for your...
I think. Are we almost? I'm having really.
We're having so much fun.
Oh my goodness, I'm having a lot of fun.
This is what happens when you give Fernando an espresso before the podcast.
All right, forget it. Let's go. No.
So mine is on the real estate platform Crexy. There are currently 248 offices listed in Miami-Dade County for sale on the platform. That doesn't mean that's everything obviously listed for sale. It's just what's on Crexy's platform. The median sales price is $929,000. The total volume of office space for sale is $725 million. The median square footage is 5,283 square feet. And the median asking cap rate is 6.5%, but the median sold is 5.3. So that tells me that cap rates are moving up in office. And then to our point about A, B, or C class building, the median year built is 1985. Right. So that's telling me there's a lot of B and C space that's available. That would probably be a good investment opportunity. And the median days on market is 127. Yeah.
There's a few of those in Coral Gables also. Coral Gables has a few of those, Class C buildings that are just in a beautiful location that are prime for, for some love.
Facelift.
For a facelift and some attention. Well, the stat that I have today has to do with, again, as I mentioned earlier, strong confidence in Miami's future in the office sector. And that is that currently there are over 2 million square feet of office space under construction. The Brickell submarket takes the lead, accounting for 40% of all ongoing construction, primarily 830 Brickell Tower. And the Biscayne corridor follows closely behind with 593,000 square feet under construction, including two big notable projects in Wynwood, one called the Ursa, which is still over a year away from completion. I will say kudos to Avison Young for their office report, which is also very good. I will say, to your point about office, Class A office developers are not necessarily risk takers. They're not the first to arrive in an area, So you're right. It's virtually impossible to find a Class A building in a Class C location, let's say, right? But I think that restaurateurs, entertainers, artists are really the creatives, and they are the ones that really forge ahead. So I remember early on, many years ago, when Soika announced that they were going to build, they were going to have this restaurant on 54th, right in Midtown and Biscayne. And that was an area that, people were afraid to go to. Edge of scary, absolutely.
That one actually was just plain old scary.
I think that one was, but to have that, and I remember that there was a sense of, that was part of the excitement for people. Yeah. It's like, hey, we're going to venture into,
the unknown.
But what an incredible, and I always think about that. That's a pioneering kind of thing that we have to celebrate. Is it is the risk takers, right? And they have been around there for forever. And everything that grew around there, I think you got to give that a lot of credit. So I think the retailers, the restaurateurs, the artists, they're really the ones that forge ahead. And so you got to be paying attention to those things,
right? Right. Yeah, pay attention to where they're going, because that's where the urban core is going to meet, right? Doubt. That's where they're going to move to. So absolutely. that's a good, very good insight for where to look if you want to invest. Yeah. So thank you so much for joining us on an office tour of Miami Class A, B, C, D, and F properties.
It is wonderful to have you listen. Thank you guys so much for your time, and we'll see you next time. God bless.